letter went on to argue that the bill would breed distrust and discourage documented immigrants from seeking help from law enforcement. Ultimately, it concluded, this legislation is bad for Texas and will make our communities more dangerous for all. So here's something to think about. And this article kind of went around the question, but it didn't entirely ignore it. There were places during the Obama administration that used basically sanctuary city status, described themselves as sanctuary cities, claimed that they would no longer support detainers, that they would not honor them, and basically adopted this stance against immigration enforcement. And the government allowed that. It didn't do anything about it. It said, well, you shouldn't do that, but hands off. However, once Trump came in and started making all his noise and doing all his junk, suddenly now you have places like in Texas where Governor Abbott is making this very unambiguous statement about anybody refusing to comply with detainer requests or support federal immigration authorities in ways that, let me remind you, they are not required to do. So what Governor Abbott is trying to do is require them to cooperate in ways that they don't believe they should be cooperating. He's involving them or attempting to force them to become involved in processes that they don't feel they should be involved with. Now, this can only mean one thing. This means that he supports the Trumpista, the Trump clan concept of immigration enforcement, the Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump style immigration attacks, basically. This is an open and very clear statement of support for that ideology. It's not about the law. It's not about immigration enforcement, because the law has existed as it is for some time now, and immigration enforcement has been going along for quite a while. And you didn't have these guys popping out of the woodwork suddenly being so gung-ho about enforcing it until you got somebody in there who wants to use it as a weapon against certain ethnic groups, ethnic and religious groups. That tells you a lot about who these people are and what they believe in. So this is far, far, don't let their rhetoric sway you. This is far beyond anyone's belief in our system of justice and any of the other kind of excuses that they might make. This is clearly an unambiguous and as close to a direct statement as you can get that I too am a bigot and a racist, and I want to support efforts to criminalize and pathologize even immigrants in our country. I think that's pretty serious stuff, and I think anybody who has any ability to sway voters in Texas really needs to think about this and to start talking to their friends and family that might live there and say, hey, you cannot support this guy anymore. You cannot support these people anymore. They are very bad for this country. So that's kind of a serious thing, and it's something that I don't know. It's something that we need to think about. So anyway, unless you think it's just immigrants, I mean, consider this. I mean, think this is Texas now, and these are people in Texas. This is the current ruling party or ruling government or whatever you want to call it, the people in power in Texas. And that is not the only front that they're attacking on. They're not just attacking immigrants. For example, from CBS News, we have a story entitled "Texas Proposes Law That Would Allow Adoption Agencies to Ban Jews, Muslims, and Gays." Think about this. It reads as follows. Parents seeking to adopt children in Texas could soon be rejected by state-funded or private agencies with religious objections to them being Jewish, Muslim, gay, single, or interfaith couples under a proposal in the Republican-controlled legislature. 5 other states have passed similar laws protecting faith-based adoption organizations that refuse to place children with gay parents or other households on religious grounds. But the Texas rule would extend to state-funded agencies. Only South Dakota's is similarly sweeping. Actually, it says similarly sweepingly. But I'm sure they didn't mean that. Anyway, the bill has been scheduled for debate and approval Saturday in the State House, but lawmakers bogged down with other matters. Oh, they're too busy attacking immigrants, but they'll get around to the gays and Jews and Muslims. It is now expected to come up next week. Republican sponsors of the Texas bill say it is designed to support the religious freedom of adoption agencies and foster care providers. Many of the agencies are private and faith-based but receive state funds. But opponents say it robs children of stable homes while funding discrimination with taxpayer dollars. This would allow adoption agencies to turn away qualified, loving parents who are perhaps perfect in every way because the agency has a difference in religious belief, said Catherine Oakley, senior legislative counsel for the Human Rights Campaign. This goes against the best interest of the child. The bill also blatantly violates the Constitution, Oakley added. Oh, I'm glad that somebody brought that up. As a government entity, Texas is bound to treat people equally under the law, said Oakley. This is a violation of equal protection under the law. State Representative James Frank, the bill's author, said it's designed to address the state's foster care crisis by making reasonable accommodations so everyone can participate in the system. Everyone is welcome, but you don't have to think alike to participate, said Frank, a Republican from rural Wichita Falls, near Texas's border with Oklahoma. Suzanne Bryant, an Austin-based adoption attorney who works with LGBT clients and was one of the first individuals to have a legal same-sex marriage in Texas, said the bill fails to provide alternatives for prospective parents rebuffed by adoption agencies. Say you call an agency and say, "I'm Jewish," and it's a Catholic agency, and they hang up on you, said Bryant. The bill says you can be referred to another agency, but there's no mechanism to set that up. Not only could agencies turn away hopeful parents under the religious freedom provision, but they could require children in the foster care system to comply with their faith-based requirements. That means child welfare organizations could send LGBT kids to conversion therapy, a treatment designed to turn people straight, which the Pan American Health Organization calls, quote, a serious threat to the health and well-being of affected people, end quote. And they could deny young people contraception and abortions. If a 17-year-old who is sexually active wants birth control, the burden to prove that constitutional right is on the child, said Bryant. They don't have their parents advocating for them and supposed to go it alone against the system. More than 100 children died in Texas Child Protective Services last year alone when a judge had already ruled that the system violated youngsters' constitutional rights by leaving them more troubled when they left the system than when they entered it. Republican Governor Greg Abbott, there he is again, made fixing foster care an emergency priority, and the legislature has increased funding while backing a number of major changes. Frank said most adoptions happen through the state's Child Protective Services, which would not be subject to the religious freedom mandate, though outside agencies that receive state funding would be. He said this bill codifies the choices adoption agencies are already making as they select parents. My guess is if you have an LGBT agency, they're going to pick an LGBT family. And if you have a Baptist agency, they may be more likely to pick a Baptist family, Frank said. They're free to do that and should be free to do that. Frank also said the bill directs state child services to ensure that other outside adoption providers without religious objections are made available to help would-be adoptive parents who get turned away by any who do raise objections. But his proposal is just one of 24 pending bills in the Texas legislature that LGBT advocates say encourage discrimination. So think about this in conjunction with the last thing. So Texas has stated quite clearly and unequivocally that at least the government, the current ruling powers, support the Trump/Sessions anti-immigrant agenda. And, according to this, they fully support a Christian-centric, heterosexual-centric adoption system where those people are basically treated in a special way. Now, it's written in such a way that you can say, well, no, it allows everyone to basically discriminate according to their own choices. But given this is always the argument of status quo supporters, is that once they've arranged things so that they're pretty much in power and in control, then they say, well, no, let's just make it equal for everybody. Let's just keep it the way it is, and everybody gets a chance to discriminate equally. But you can't if you're in a minority, if you're one of the rare few who has a certain belief system or a certain sexuality or gender or whatever. You can discriminate all you want. It won't do you a lick of good when the majority is discriminating against you. So while they're still the majority, they want to establish rules that allows discrimination. Trump was trying to do this with one of his mini executive orders the other day, but he kind of failed to really come up with anything that really worked. But he was attempting to do this and allowed religious discrimination nationally. Christianity is the dominant religion, so who has the most power to discriminate in a place where they are dominant? Yeah. It's the people who in the dominant group has the greatest power to do harm if they are allowed to discriminate. I mean, that's why we have so many laws against discrimination. It's to say, okay, it doesn't matter if everybody but one person has a certain belief system, that one person has the right to be treated equally, can use your business, access your services, and so on. And what these guys are trying to do, step by step, is turn that clock back and say, no, we get to discriminate. We want to discriminate. We get to discriminate. And they say, well, everybody can discriminate. According to our bill, you're all allowed to discriminate equally, except that, of course, the majority's discrimination carries more force and is able to do more damage. And that's what people are complaining about. But that's what Texas seems bent on doing right now. And so maybe the moral of this story is stay out of Texas, avoid Texas. I don't know. It's not looking really good in Texas right now. I can't support that state at all. They're doing some terrible things, really terrible things. So, moving onward, we got a lot of different topics to cover. I'm trying to figure out which one. Okay. Wow, I thought I had something else here, and I'm not seeing it. Okay, I'm just gonna go with this one because it's the next one in front of me. more about, you heard me talk about the Trump-Sessions administration. I'm including Sessions in this, even though it's the Trump administration, because Sessions is the Attorney General, and he's tasked with enforcing the law and kind of defining what laws will be enforced by the federal government and in what way. And he's every bit the bigot and racist that Trump seems to be. Here's an example. So this is entitled "The Racist Discredited Argument Trump's DOJ Just Made in a Federal Court." Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. Let's see how they back it up. So here's a pro tip for the lawyers at Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. If you want to defend the president's efforts to lock people out of the nation because of their religion, you might not want to rely on discredited Supreme Court decisions enabling a racist backlash. So Palmer v. Thompson is one of the great missteps in the Supreme Court's often unfortunate history on matters of race. This case centered on the city of Jackson, Mississippi, and their operation of 5 racially segregated public swimming pools. After a court ordered the pools integrated, the city closed the pools rather than operating pools where people of all races could swim. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 vote, let Jackson get away with it. As a federal judge acknowledged in 1989, quote, "The Supreme Court has never expressly overturned Palmer, but it has all but done so." Nevertheless, the Trump administration cites Palmer favorably in a brief it filed in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, which hears a challenge to Trump's Muslim ban on Monday afternoon. That's this afternoon. A central issue in that case, International Refugee Assistance Project v. Trump, is whether Donald Trump's many repeated statements that he intends to ban Muslims from entering the United States show that he acted with an unconstitutional motivation when he signed an order banning many Muslims from entering the United States. At least on its face, the most recent version of Trump's travel ban does not explicitly state that it is a Muslim ban. Instead, it bans most citizens of 6 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. Nevertheless, there is some evidence that this was the ban's true intent. As a candidate, Trump promised, quote, "a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our representatives can figure out what is going on," whatever that means. Trump later said that because people were so upset when I used the word Muslim, he shifted his rhetoric to talk about territory instead of Muslim. And former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, a close confidant to Trump, also said that Trump told him to, quote, "show me the right way to do it legally," and that the nations-based approach was deemed the best way to give the impression that Trump's Muslim ban was not actually a Muslim ban. The Trump administration's brief cites Palmer for the proposition that, quote, "searching for governmental purpose outside the operative terms of governmental action and official pronouncements is fraught with practical pitfalls and hazards that could make courts' task extremely difficult," end quote. The administration, in other words, wants courts to evaluate the Muslim ban based solely on the facial language of the order and Trump's official actions in office, not on his many promises to ban Muslims. Palmer claimed that no case in this court has held that a legislative act may violate equal protection solely because of the motivations of the men who voted for it, in part because it is extremely difficult for a court to ascertain the motivation or collection of different motivations that lie behind a legislative enactment. But the court stepped away from Palmer only a few years after Palmer was handed down. As Justice Byron White wrote for the court in Washington v. Davis, to the extent that Palmer suggests a generally applicable proposition that legislative purpose is irrelevant in constitutional adjudication, our prior cases are to the contrary. So even if Palmer does remain good law, moreover, Much of its analysis has little bearing on an executive order signed by a single man. The pitfalls and hazards Palmer warned about arise in large part because it is very hard to assign a single motivation to a collection of many lawmakers. If 100 lawmakers vote for a bill, and 30 of them do so for racist reasons, is that sufficient reason to declare the bill unconstitutional? What if one of those 30 was an influential committee chair? What if only 10 of them clearly had racist motives, but the rest of the lawmakers' motives were unclear? This problem of determining a collective body's motives simply does not arise, however, when a single individual signs an executive order. So long as Donald Trump occupies the White House, his motivations are the only motives that matter. There's no need for courts to engage in the admittedly quite difficult task of sorting through dozens of lawmakers' statements to assess their motives. Nor is it particularly difficult for judges to determine Trump's motives in this particular case, since the man literally spent the better part of 2 years bragging about his desire to ban Muslims on the campaign trail. In any event, the Trump administration's decision to rely on a discredited decision that enabled a terrible result is a strange one. As J.P. Schnapper Casteres, Schnapper, I like that, who first pointed out the troubling citation at Take Care blog notes, the Trump administration's decision to cite a largely discarded segregation decision is somewhat evocative of a recent brief by the state of Kansas favorably citing Dred Scott. A move that quickly went viral, was widely condemned, and prompted a formal withdrawal and apology by the Kansas Attorney General. Wow. So, according to them, you can't judge the intent of this executive order based on this Palmer previous court order. You have to judge it only by what is written into it. Okay, that's sort of fair enough. It's a decent argument that you shouldn't judge, that taking intent into account is difficult. But as this article states, it's not that difficult in this case because the person made his intent very clear. And so we can assume that it is possible to take him at his word. I think it's difficult to ever take Trump at his word, since he's such a consummate and consistent liar. But, in this instance, he's been pretty consistent. So, I don't know. But that's the story there. And that's what do we do here? Boy, there's so many different things here. Okay, a little more about Trump. Might as well just keep going on the Trump train here. If I can get this thing to load. Where are we? Come on. Very slow. Wow. Come on. Can't be so slow. All right. Man. Some websites, they just got so much garbage in there. So this is from CBS News again. And as long as we're talking about Trump, I thought this might be interesting. So this is entitled, Deported Man's Wife and Friends Rethink Voting for Trump. Mm-hmm. So a few points about the person in question. Roberto Beristain, who has no criminal record, was deported after illegally coming to the U.S. nearly 20 years ago. His wife and children are U.S. citizens. The number of people caught trying to cross the southern border has dropped 60% in the first 3 months of President Trump's administration. Analysts believe President Trump's new policy has deterred illegal border crossings, but so have other factors, including an improving job outlook in Mexico. So, President Trump's promised he'd crack down on illegal immigrants, and his first 100 days has moved quickly to do just that. Since the president took office, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, says it arrested 21,000 undocumented immigrants, more than 5,000 of whom have no criminal record. That's more than twice as many as the year before. The president's supporters argue his tough new policy has led to a dramatic drop in the number of people trying to cross into the U.S. this year, but it's also had a profound effect on communities throughout the country. For the past few weeks, we've followed how the new policy has played out in one community in Indiana, where people were surprised to learn that one of those deported was a friend and neighbor, the owner of a popular local restaurant. He'd lived in the country for nearly 20 years, had no criminal record, and his wife and children are all U.S. citizens. Eddie's Steak Shed in Granger, Indiana, is a local institution. It's a family-run restaurant where generations of Hoosiers have come for conversation and cholesterol. And the following is like a conversation here. So I'll be reading the name of the person who makes the statement, and then I'll make the statement, and then blah, blah, blah. So I'm reading the script. So Anderson Cooper says, "It seems like this is like your local Cheers?" The group responds, "It is, it is. But as we spoke with these regulars a few weeks ago, the man they said was the heart of the business, its longtime cook and new owner, Roberto Betterstein, was behind bars awaiting deportation. Betterstein entered the U.S. illegally from Mexico in 1998, but in recent years he'd been issued a temporary work permit, a social security number, and a driver's license." Kimberly Glowacki says, "It just feels wrong." Michael Craig says, "The community is better for having someone like him." Matt Leelert says, "I mean, he showed up here with just the shirt on his back, and he's a restaurant owner 20 years later. I mean, and he worked his butt off to get there. I've seen it." They're all strong supporters of Roberto, though 4 out of the 6 of them voted for President Trump. During the primaries, the president said this about illegal immigrants. Quote, "They will go out. They will come back, some will come back, the best, through a process, and it may not be a very quick process." And later during the general election, he said, "But we have some bad hombres out there, and we're going to get them out." Dave Keck says, "I voted for him because he said he was going to get rid of the bad hombres. Roberto is a good hombre." And Roberto's wife, Helen, who also works at the restaurant, was born in Greece and became a U.S. citizen 16 years ago. She met Roberto in 1998 at another restaurant in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Helen says, "He was a busser and I was a server. He started talking to me a lot and I tried to ignore him, but he kept on talking to me. Smiling and smiling and smiling. He always smiles, a very positive person. They got married, had 3 kids, and settled into a comfortable suburban life." Anderson asks, "Has he ever been in trouble with the law?" And Helen says, "Never, never." Anderson says, "Never committed a crime, DUI, anything?" Helen says, "Definitely not, no." Anderson says, "He's not a criminal." And she says, "He's not a criminal. The only bad thing he's done is stayed in the United States because he loves this country."